Joseph M. Plavcan is, in the truest sense of the phrase, Erie's leading artist and its premier art teacher. But he feels he has not finished learning.
I continue to be a student myself. Very, very definitely, yeah, because I'm curious about new methods, new materials, and new attitudes towards painting and what can be accomplished. I'm not necessarily the type of an individual who puts his nose to the other dog's tail. I try to explore things that I feel in my own mind are new directions and new things to do with the various media that are available for me at the time.
This is June Smith. It was in 1931 that a young artist who grew up in Erie returned after training in Philadelphia and Europe.
I think this one is an interesting one here because it's one of the first waterfront things that I did. The waterfront and I are synonymous, I think. As a matter of fact, I have a standing arrangement now with the Gidgy Smith, who owns this bait stand here. I get all of my bait free. He said, "Joe, you belong to the waterfront, you're a part of it." Now this is the early waterfront. And you can see this steam tug here? These have long since gone. They've disappeared. The fish tug later became gasoline operated and diesel operated, and all of this is gone. It's disappeared. This, incidentally, was the old soldiers and sailors' home boathouse. They had a boat here that would take the soldiers and sailors out for lake trips. And I painted this in the 30s when I first came back into Erie, and decided that I like the waterfront. Matter of fact, this is old enough to have an outhouse right at the edge of the edge of the dock here. Someone asked me the other day whether someone was in there, and I said I haven't opened the door yet. Here's a piece of landscape thing that I did on 23rd Street between Praed and German. I spent a whole summer on this one. Enjoyed very much painting it while my wife was supporting me as a starving artist. I did the starving, she did the working. It was a very pleasant summer experience. I sat down in the heat of the sun and painted away. Incidentally, this picture was exhibited in many major exhibitions in the country: Art Institute of Chicago, Corcoran Biennial, Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and it received a fair number of awards in the process of its journey through the country.
How did you get into art? What started you off? Did your parents encourage you? Were your parents inclined this way?
No, mother and father were European immigrants, and they were struggling very desperately to make a livelihood in the country here. What with the family of 10 children, their concerns were primarily with the practical facts.
I should say.
And this was what they were concerned about. As a matter of fact, after I graduated from my junior school, primary school pattern, went to Academy High School, they wanted me to become a machinist.
Who's they?
And my father and mother.
Oh.
They thought that, well, this was the practical expression for any individual.
Help you make a living? It would get you...
I would definitely make a living as a machinist. They bought me a pair of blue overalls and equipped me with all the artifacts that were necessary to function in a machine shop. And I was accepted. Apparently my mental capacity was indicative of the fact that maybe I could function there. But when I did get in there, I broke every bit on the machine. And Mr. Hendricks suggested that, "Joe, you better get out. You'll never be a machinist." So I packed up my little duds and started wandering through the high school corridors.
Now, which high school was this?
Academy High School.
Okay. Was it in the same place?
Yeah,
it is
and
now?
finally wound up in the upper turret, and that was where the art class was. And I was rubbing my nose against the window, and there was this very, very charming man came to the door and opened it very gently and asked me what I was doing. And I told him I just got kicked out of the machine shop and I was wandering around. He says, "Don't you want to come in?" I said, "I'd love to. Thank you." And I walked into the room, and he said, "Do you want to walk around the room and see what we're doing?" So I started to wander through the room area, and finally he came up to me after I'd completed my exploration. And he said, "Well, what do you think?" And I was kind of a cocky little kid and at the time, and I said, "Well, hell, I can paint better than any of these guys." So George said, "Can you?" And he gave me a piece of charcoal and paper and sent me in front of the cast of Moses. And said, "Well, go ahead and draw that." And I went in and drew it. And it took me about an hour and a half, I think, to complete the drawing. And he looked at it and he says, "You know," he says, "I kind of think you're right." So he took me down to the office, and after that I started to paint. And
Now, this was who?
George Erickson was the teacher. I can recall one afternoon I was standing on the corner. When I was a kid, I chewed tobacco.
Oh.
And I had this cud in my mouth, and he drove up with this Model T Ford and threw the door open. He said, "Joe, you want to go painting?" And I said, "I'd love to, Mr. Erickson." I got in the car with a cud of tobacco, and I didn't want him to know that I was chewing. So we finally wound up at the head of Peach Street, and he gave me a paint box, and I finally swallowed that and became very ill.
I guess.
But he gave me a little paint box, and I painted a cornfield, and he was painting a cornfield further on. And he came back and looked at the thing, and he says, "Joe," he says, "you are really a painter." And I said, "Well, thank you, Mr. Erickson." And I think my face was white, ashen white when I got through. Yeah.
I take it that chewing tobacco was frowned on at that time.
Very definitely, yeah. Well, he discovered eventually that
You chewed tobacco.
that I did that, and he lectured me on the ills of tobacco. George's primary emphasis in the class was on the portrait and the figure. And our own, I had a friend, Bob Joy, and he and I initiated the landscape aspect of the thing after this tobacco chewing experience that I had. And we'd go out and we'd skip school, go out and paint. And we turned out numerous landscapes. As a matter of fact, I turned out 100 of them for the Women's Club, and they sold the things for $5 a piece to help finance me through school.
Cool.
After high school, I went to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and I spent 4 years there. I spent 2 years at the academy itself in the city, and 2 years at the summer school at the landscape school, which was located in Chester Springs. We studied primarily doing the figure, portrait head, still life, and design, and I learned to do my etchings there. And later when they opened the landscape school up at Chester Springs, I volunteered to go out there because I was very much interested in landscape. And we had some excellent teachers there. Incidentally, after my academy study, I went to Europe and studied there, and came in contact with a lot of the European painters, some of the contemporary men, and was very much interested in their ideas of painting.
What kind of studying did you do in Europe? What actually did
Well, actually, it was visitation of galleries and museums, studios, places where painting was being done and painting was being exhibited. I started out in England, went to Belgium, France, Spain, Italy, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Germany, and visited all the museums that I possibly could. And I was very much concerned about the processes and the methods that all the painters used. This is one of the first portraits that I did. As a matter of fact, the first portrait that I did was one of Mrs. Andrew Culbertson that was exhibited at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. This one here was painted at the Pennsylvania Academy when I was a student there. It was a picture of Gardner. It was exhibited in one of the local shows received a prize, and it's done in oil. This is one of the recent portraits that I've completed. Now, I'm not the traditional type of portrait painter. I'm not interested in the idea of doing a portrait that they call pink bologna on the brown sauce. When I make a portrait, I want it to be a picture, a painting. And I'm very much interested in the composition, the arrangement of the thing, and I'm concerned with the color and so on. Now, this thing here is painted in the recent my recent color attitude. When I work the portrait, I get my drawing in and try to lay all of my colors in, my basic colors that I know I'm going to contend with. And then as I go ahead and develop it, I begin to move my sequences as well as the volumes that I'm contending with. And the color follows all the color changes. If you examine the thing closely, you'll find that I very definitely go from, now I've got a violet blue here, then I move into the blue, then the blue-green, then into the yellow-green. Now she had Julie had sort of a brownish character to her hair, and there was a brown factor that began to indicate itself, and I began to move into that area of the yellowish green here and back into the green. But here's the interesting fact. The basic influence of this whole thing were the colors here, because they precipitated the concept of all of the environmental colors. And I had to deal with these colors on the basis of what these colors in the flesh of the heads and so forth were doing. And this thing becomes not only an emotional thing, intellectual thing, scientific thing, but it becomes almost a mathematical thing. You have to figure out all these colors as they begin to move. I worked on this about 4 months. This was my purple cow. When I first came into Erie, Erie was a town that was involved in traditional concepts, and just as a sort of a, well, you might say a joke, I decided to paint a purple cow because I never saw a purple cow, never hoped to see. I'd rather see a purple cow than be one. And I exhibited this one in at the Art Center, or at the Art Gallery, and it won first prize. The juror was in sympathy with my thinking and feeling at the time, but this was far ahead of what was being done in Erie. I think it was painted in the 30s. It has 1930 on it here. And they rebelled against it. They just didn't like the thing and couldn't understand it. Huh? Yeah, I got a prize on the thing. And it did the rounds in the country. Incidentally, this had a rather interesting process here. This was the first of the gesso painting that was being done in the country. I was in Belgium studying Memling's thing. And in Bruges they have that triptych of the Virgin and the Annunciation and so forth. And there was some amazing detail in that painting. And I asked for a magnifying glass to check the thing out. One of the people in the museum handed me the glass. And I looked at a little tiny reflection in the armor of one of the soldiers. And you could see the whole city reflected in it. I thought, my gosh, how could the man ever do it? We can't do it with oil. So I began to ask questions. And gradually I found out that how the Dutchman had worked out this gesso process of coating a laminated board with a fine coating of a medium that's referred to as gesso. Actually, it's just sort of a plaster medium. And you can draw absolutely minutely with silver point on that coating, and then later develop the drawing with inks, colors, varnishes, oil glazes, and come up to the point where you have a brilliantly meticulous drawing. And I came to the United States and produced my own gesso and tried to work out the process. And incidentally, that purple cow that I showed you was one of the first of the gesso things that I did when I came back to the United States. And later on it spread. We began to use it. Then gesso was manufactured commercially, and now it's being used throughout the whole country.
A teacher of the new old gesso style, Plavcan is a teacher of artists too. They have been as brilliant as Richard Inaskevich, Roy Algren, John Silk Deckard, John Vahanian, Vitus Kaiser, and as down home as the kid next door. His approach to teaching was as individual as his style.
When I came into the city of Erie, the accepted method of teaching was prepare an individual, presumably for a commercial art job. And the administration felt that what you should do is teach them a few commercial tricks and draw from photographs and learn to paint signs and do some layouts and things of that sort. This constituted the commercial art program. I had an entirely different approach to the thing. I felt that as long as I was dealing with these people, I'd have to teach them to draw, teach them to paint, but primarily teach them to see, to learn to evaluate their environment, to understand it as completely and thoroughly as they possibly could. And this constituted a wholly new direction in teaching that was completely unorthodox, because it wasn't current anywhere in the country at the time. You sat at the desk, the teacher passed out a piece of paper, instructed the procedure that you were to follow, and it was very stilted and unproductive. And I felt that I should open up this thing and deal with an individual who could think for himself, work for himself, and become the type of a person who could evaluate the environment that he was dealing with, draw it, express it, paint it, compose it, and so forth. My first step that I took with a youngster when he came into my class was to test him. And the first thing that I did that I thought was extremely important was to find out how much really creative imagination this individual would have. And I used a sort of an amusing approach to discovering that capacity or that quality in the individual's makeup. I'd assign a problem and tell them to go ahead and close their eyes and make a drawing with their eyes closed. And these kids, when they first started, they thought that was funny. It was amusing to them. Here we were drawing with our eyes closed. But they start to draw, and you could tell there was no connection to the graphic elements that they put down on the paper. But the content, the mental visual content was there. Mm-hmm. And if I could discover that the individual had this capacity to visualize in the inner eye and had the imagination, then there was my artist. And I would isolate these individuals and say, well, I'm going to work with you. The other ones, I would either tell them to change courses or accept them on a temporary basis, realizing the fact that eventually they wouldn't amount to the wouldn't express the capacity that the other ones would.
This was not, I take it, a conventional approach to teaching.
It wasn't. No. Then the next step, of course, was give them basic fundamentals. I firmly was convinced, and am still convinced, that people do not see. We don't see things. We're so concerned with our inward problems that are going on inside of it, that the world passes by us sort of casually, and we don't comprehend them. We can't recall the things that we come in contact with, say, 5-10 seconds ago. They're gone. We look at them and they disappear. And my concern was to teach these people to really evaluate the environment that they came in contact with. And I tried to teach people to see, and to see completely. And this would involve, of course, making drawings, evaluating the subject they were working with. I had never felt secure in the textbooks that were published at the time to teach people painting and drawing, because I think that that's sort of second-hand material. Leonardo da Vinci said that the artist is the son and not the grandson of nature. He must go directly to nature to discover the materials and the elements that he would eventually contend with. And I felt that philosophy was one that I would follow. And my first process, the procedures that I used in teaching, were to prepare these people to go outdoors to evaluate their environment. And that constituted first giving them a direction as to how the structure of the world was actually built. We live in a 3- and 4-dimensional world. And I had to point out to them that the world was made up of spheres, of cylinders, of crystals, and how these crystals were built, and how the eye actually transmitted the structure of all of these elements to the inner eye, to the brain, and the brain conceived the structure of these things. Then I'd teach them perspective. I told them, much to their amazement, that they were the center of the universe. The world belonged to them. When I'm gone, the world goes. And these kids would look at me very much surprised. You mean I am the center of the universe? Yes, your universe belongs to you, and it is individual and is a part of your makeup. And eventually these people accept it. And once they accepted that fact, and they accepted the fact that all of the elements that they were to contend with existed out there if they would evaluate them and perceive them, then they became good draftsmen. Mm-hmm. Then I would teach them to draw and shade, and then we'd go into the factor of color. And color and working outdoors is a very complex factor to a beginning student, because the world outside is so complicated. When you look at a tree with the myriad leaves and limbs and the orientation of the bark patterns and so forth are so complex that the student is completely confused when he first tangles with the problem. And my problem was always to get this individual to start.
But ideas were different when Plavcan started. He had to develop many of his theories on his own.
Color to me was a thing that I was very much concerned with, even as a youngster, when I worked with George Erickson. Actually, at that time we were working with 3 colors. I used red, yellow, and blue, and white in intermixtures during that impressionist period of my painting. But I was very much enamored with Joseph William Mallard Turner, whom I feel was actually one of the great colorists of all time. And as a student in high school, I came in contact with Turner paintings and felt that he predated actually the Impressionist movement. Actually, the Frenchmen went to England to study Turner and the things that Turner did with color. And when I had received my Crescent Fellowship and I went to Europe to study, my first objective was to get to the Tate Gallery to see Turner's paintings and his watercolors. And I had the opportunity to handle original Turner watercolors that hadn't been matted or framed, They were in portfolio form, the original watercolors. And I spent a whole afternoon just thumbing through these absolutely magnificent colored things. And after I left England, I went into France and had an opportunity to see Monet's things, and Van Gogh, Gauguin, Cézanne. And while I was a student at the Pennsylvania Academy, the Academy was still functioning on the black and white process of painting. And I couldn't quite tie together the attitude that the Frenchman and Turner had used with what I had been taught at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. America was backward in its color comprehension as far as painting was concerned. And I made it a point that eventually I would try to understand how the human brain actually perceived color.
I think the style evolved on the basis of what I saw, but was absolutely unable at the time, at certain periods of my painting, was unable to project because of the previous training that I had had. Now, when we learn to work graphically, we go back on that old experience of working with a white piece of chalk on a black board and a black pencil on a white piece of paper. Consequently, all of our concepts are in terms of black and white. And up until you graduate from high school, you're not aware of the fact that the world is a color world. And I've had to fight that early experience, subconscious experience, of the black and white conditioning, and gradually eliminate that and come out with this real awareness of what this color world is. I am particularly concerned now in thinking in terms of this light mixture of color instead of the pigment mixture of color. Now actually, when we conceive of a color mentally, we conceive of it, the brain picks it up in terms of mixtures of light, not in terms of mixtures of paint. And I found out so much about the human eye, how the impulse is transmitted to the brain, and how colors are mixed in nature as a result of that transmission. And I know that I have to reinterpret these things. I have to expand my awareness of what I'm seeing. I don't feel that I've arrived in that area. And I think that you can move in abstract areas in realizing that kind of thing, or in representational forms. It doesn't make any difference. But the important thing is coming to an awareness of this total realization of how the human mind perceives. This is a thing that I did downtown, and it's an old building that's been replaced by one of the radio stations. It's torn down. This is Romeo and Juliet. I spent a good deal of time on this one, and I remember Richard Anushkevich and I were working in that back alley, and he did a watercolor of the same subject, and we had a lot of fun doing it.
You did have a special color approach to this.
Yeah, incidentally, in this one here, I started to work with just red and green. I decided there were two opposites, and I'd play with them, find out exactly what would happen. Now, there is no color in here except red and a green. And here are the two basic colors that I used to develop the whole painting. Now, I became very much interested in the idea of using color for color's sake, as well as working with a represented subject. I did experiment with a lot of abstractions, which I felt had a sort of a meaningless significance, and I felt it going definitely into the representational and still keeping in mind the color fact as being the most important thing that we deal with as artists today. And this is one of the early color things, a painting of some buildings between, on 21st Street between State and Peach. Now, someone asked me, well, what kind of a color attitude am I taking? And I was talking to one of the television men here a short time ago, and he said that they were functioning primarily on a red, green, and blue plate mixtures. And this is exactly the color system that I use in working with these paintings. I use the Ostwald process, the red, the yellow, the green, and the blue as my four primaries. Now, if you mix red and green together in terms of light, you get yellow. And I work on that principle of perception and concept. This is based on that fact. And there are a lot of other things that are, at the moment, I couldn't possibly go into in detail, that take place in the canvas that become very subtle parts of the canvas and make the canvas a vivid and lively thing. If you note what the difference between these and the prior canvases, there is a brilliance there that some people are not willing to accept. And yet this is the world that we're constantly seeing. And someday we'll adjust ourselves to it, hopefully.
Let me ask you a question while that's up there.
Go ahead.
You say that when you mix light, you get yellow from red and green.
That's right.
But when you mix pigment, you mix red and green, you get brown. Well,
That's right.
Basically, you're still working with pigment. Could you explain how you do that a little bit?
Well, I'm working with the concept of what I perceive, June. I'm not working in terms of the intermixture of pigments, as most painters do. All of my things, I say that if I see a certain color, then there are certain other things going to happen in terms of how the light factor is functioning in these color mixtures. And I have to mentally reinterpret this thing and put it down. This is the color that my mind is actually conceiving. See, the concept takes place up here. The percept is here, you see. And the eye is a very complicated mechanism. And the transmission of what happens on the retina to the brain and the reinterpretation are really quite complex. And there's a world of, there's an open frontier that's so wide and so expansive in pursuing further areas in this color attitude that I would like to live 2, 3, 10 more years and try to express them. If I can't, I hope somebody else does. Yeah. Now this is one of the early things here. Actually, this is a night scene, and that's painted at 23rd and State. This is a friendly tavern here. I don't know whether some of you have been there or not, but I imagine it's a nice place. I myself haven't been in there. But this is St. John's Lutheran Church, illuminated at night. This is the color that happens when this mercury vapor lamp illuminates a building. Now I changed that gray into green, and a mercury vapor lamp will have a tendency to eliminate yellows. And now this all turned into the green area here. Consequently, your sky became a very definite violet because you were getting reds coming up from the illumination on the Lutheran church and coming up through the sky there. The street, of course, went into a violet. And it was an interesting thing to work out as a color thing. And then the lights in the building here. This is fluorescent lighting here. This is incandescent lighting in the coming through the windows. And you notice the difference in color there that occurs.
How long ago did you paint this one?
I judge about 12, 15 years ago. I've been fooling around with color as a perceived experience now for, oh heavens, 25 years now. I think that it's gotten to the point where it's spread. I have a dealer in Washington. I have had several one-man shows there. And there were a lot of painters came into the, to see the show and see my shows. And then later I began to see the influence beginning to appear in New York, Philadelphia. I mean, this is a fact. It's quite a, and you notice that a lot of your prints now are based on this color idea without I hope and knowledge of what they're doing. But a lot of them are just doing it as color impact areas. But there is definite color, scientific, perceptive knowledge behind the painting of this thing. This is one of my favorite subjects, incidentally, the grain elevator. I've painted maybe about 15 or 20 paintings of the grain elevator. I felt at the time, June, that I had to create a new world for myself. I wasn't in New York. I was not following any imitator. I was not imitating any movement. I had to initiate something that was personally my own. And this has been an evolution of over 40 years.
Do the styles that you're working on now, or working in now, owe anything to new kinds of materials that are available?
I imagine so, June. I think that the introduction of acrylics has given us an opportunity to work with geometric shapes a little bit more easily, more readily. I can isolate areas of color for color's sake on the smooth gesso panel. You can brush your acrylics out really quite smoothly. And acrylic has a sort of peculiar quality of being a little brighter, more intense. You see, the acrylic is mixed with a rosin, clear rosin compound or vehicle, and oils are mixed with linseed oil. And linseed oil has a brownish character to it, and consequently it cuts down the reflectivity of the pigment crystals, as opposed to the acrylics, where the crystals come through this clear plastic. So the acrylics are a lot brighter, more intense in color. Yeah.
May have had an effect. Do you ever go back? Your style has evolved. Do you ever go back and paint in one of your earlier approaches?
Well, I don't think so. I think I'll introduce certain portions of some of the earlier experiences into what I'm doing, and I try to manipulate what I've been doing in the past with the things that I'm doing in the present.
Do you choose your medium to go with your subject, or is it the other way around, or do you have a third way of matching medium to subject?
Sometimes I'll be concerned with the medium in relation to the subject, but frequently it's the medium that precipitates the subject that I'm going to attempt. The media that I work with always fascinate me. I enjoy the variety of media. I enjoy pencil, ink, colored inks, crayons, pastels, acrylics, casein, oil, almost anything. I enjoy sculpture. I enjoy wood carving. I enjoy making frames. And whenever the mood inspires me to use a certain kind of a medium, I'll go out and go ahead and use it. Here's the white sun. And this gives you some idea of how the colors proceed from that white sun out through the yellows to the reds to the oranges, back to the orange to the yellow, and in the sky as it moves away, moves into the yellow greens, and then as it moves up, it goes up into the yellow greens, the blues, and then as it reaches the zenith, it goes back into the violets. I was intensely fascinated by the color of this cloud as it came over the top of the setting sun. And the whole landscape, of course, went into the opposite end of the spectrum, starting from the violet, going through the blues, coming down to the greens. Can you see that? And actually, that whole rolling environment took on that aspect of color. Very fascinating to me. And I play around with it and say a few prayers occasionally when I get the impulse, and then the opposite if I don't succeed. Now, I love the peninsula. And this is one of the jetties. One of my favorite fishing spots early in the morning is off the end of this jetty here. And usually I walk along these rocks here and fish this side of the jetty. And if I don't get any bass, that side of the jetty, I fish on this side of the jetty. If I don't get any bass, then I just sit down and draw. This peninsula piece is pretty indicative of some of the color attitudes and the processes and procedures that I take. It's of course, an acrylic. The whole impact area, as I call it, the interest, the center of interest, becomes the sand area through here. And this, of course, begins to produce the environmental colors that are the violets, the greens, the blue-greens, and the blues. And you'll notice all these stones here have either a purple or a violet or a blue or a green, off-green color. But the rather interesting thing, it becomes one of the more subtle factors of the processes, the procedures that I use. Instead of smudging an area where two objects meet, I have to go through a sequence of colors. Now these are actually spectrum sequences, not sequences. You'll notice that this is a violet here. We go to a blue violet here, then to a blue. Now this color is actually a blue. And then I run blues through this greenish, blue-green color, which is incidentally the opposite of this orangey yellow that comes down through here. And this gives me the blue continuity into the violet, or into the blue and the blue-violet and then the violet, which is a sort of a blending of colors, the same way that colors are blended in a prism in the spectrum. And you have to move through that. In doing that, I abandon all this concern with the black and white factor, where you smudged the edge to blend one color into another. This one here presumably is finished. Sometimes I'll look at it and wonder. It was a summer thing I did. Enjoyed the landscape. I love to fish streams. I'm a trout fisherman. And I wander all the streams in the city, in the county here, and occasionally go down to Warren County and around Titusville and fish the streams down there.
You're not so happy with this one?
Yes, I like it, but I'm going to wait and see it framed, see how it comes out. There may be a few things that I may change. I think some of these blues may be a little too intense. I think my sequences could have gone just a little bit easier as they move up into the top sky, because I'm looking with the sun coming from this direction here. This might have been just a little bit more of a greenish color through this area here. But I'm waiting. These pictures, you kind of have to go along with a sort of maturing factor. Your eye becomes blind to them eventually, and you have to go back to them and look at them, and then you begin to see new things. As a matter of fact, sometimes you dig out an old painting and look at it that you disposed of and said, well, I hate the darn thing. And this is something I never did, never wanted to do. And I look at it and I say, gosh, that's a nice thing. Did I do that?
Joseph Plavcan met Catherine Burns in art school and married during the early Depression years. Theirs has been a working partnership, family and art.
She paints, does a very excellent job, not enough of it. Every time someone comes in the studio and they look at a painting that's on the wall, they say, that's a nice thing you did there, Joe. I said, that isn't mine, that's my wife's.
You think she should do some more?
I definitely do. Of course, she thinks that time is a factor that keeps her from doing it, which it did during the time we were raising 4 children.
How do you and Catherine work together? Does she critique your paintings?
Catherine is one of my finest critics. I think without her, I'd probably wind up with some pretty bum canvases. Actually, a painter gets kind of blind to the thing that he does, because you work on it for a certain period of time, and then you get to the point where you can't see some of the errors that have accumulated.
And Catherine, because of her professional experience as a painter, can evaluate a painting. And I always bring canvases to her, sit them down, let her take a look at them. And she is extremely, extremely conscientious about her evaluation of things, much sometimes to my discomfort. And despite the fact that I sometimes resent what she says, I know that she's right. And as a result, I'll go ahead and make the changes. And I appreciate a great deal the fact that she has been that kind of a help to me. Catherine paints well, and she thinks well. She's a little bit more objective about the things. And, of course, having done the thing, I'm sensitive about the thing. I said, well, did I make a mistake there? And it kind of hurts. And she says, Joe, I don't like what you did there. And I probably want to sit down and a ball or something. But she's always right. Now, this is one of the late grain elevator things. This is painted from Dr. Dupay's office's parking area. I'd get out there early in the morning, and when about 6:30, when no one was in the parking lot, and I could wander very freely there and work. Dr. Dupay had didn't care. He, as a matter of fact, invited me to come down there to work. But this was rather interesting. Now, here's the impact area of color, this grain elevator. This is the sky. I used two kinds of blue to make the sky and the water. Because actually this is a yellow-orange here, which is the opposite, according to the Ostwald principle of color, of these colors here. Now, in this, I used a cobalt blue, and I think I repainted that sky about 5 or 6 times in order to come up with the right value and the right color. Now, this color here is a cobalt. I use nothing but pure colors. There are very few times that I intermix a color unless it belongs in the spectrum sequence from red to violet. And then I go into the colors in here, which become the purple reds. I go to the opposite end of the spectrum and begin to work from that area into the canvas. I kind of like this thing. I enjoyed doing it. The boat there was a Presque Isle. It was in dock fortunately for as long as I worked on the canvas. Here's a recent this is a colored pencil drawing that I did south of town here. Right now I'm experimenting with using the same principles of color without going down into the flat areas to see if I can come up with a statement that will be as colorful and yet have a more spacious quality about it. Now, whether I'll be successful in this procedure or not, I don't know. But here I follow all the rules of color perception throughout the whole thing. This, incidentally, is a colored pencil drawing. Incidentally, it might be interesting for you to see the procedures that I use for developing a canvas. Now, this is one I started in the summertime of a plum tree in my backyard. And you notice that I draw the thing out very carefully in black and white. Now I'm going to put a picnic underneath the plum tree, and when I finally get all the drawing done, then I'll go ahead and develop the color. Now, I did make sketches of this thing prior to doing this drawing, and I think I spent several weeks doing the drawing, had a lot of fun, and then was caught with several commissions and had to abandon the thing. This I'll continue hopefully this summer again. Now I've got one here that's in the process of development. It's a winter thing. And I think, now this, I made a sketch of this at the a place that's referred to as the Stink Hole on the peninsula. And this is a place where they used to dump sturgeon carcasses after they took the caviar out of them. And it's right at the bend of the road before you get to the stretch that leads you to the administration building at the on the peninsula. And this is going to be an ice fisherman. I've made the drawing. The drawing's in the house in my sketchbook, and I worked from that with some variations. But here you can see how I lay out my colors. This is an extremely obvious thing. From the cerulean blue, as I move down into my cobalts and my ultramarines, and then to my purple blues, to my purples, to my red purples, to the reds, to the red oranges, to the oranges, to the yellows, and then down through the greens. You see, the whole spectrum is working here. Now, the problem is going to be to impact these trees, which are the interesting factors. And I'm going to have fun developing these. Right now I'm in a state of anxiety because I want to get them down. It's fun to work with a painting after you've gotten the canvas covered. And then, of course, these men coming off of the off of the ice are going to be interesting facts. And I'm going to scatter a lot of fishermen in the distance here, which I've seen on numerous occasions. Matter of fact, I attempted it several times myself until the cold drove me out. But this is the beginning. This is the sketch is the first stage. This is the second stage. This becomes the third stage, and then gradually you work to a finish.
How do you feel about the contemporary art scene, other contemporary artists?
Well, who would you have in mind, particularly, Jen?
Well, let me put it this way. Who's your favorite contemporary artist?
I can't say that I have any favorite contemporary artist. I feel that a lot of the contemporary movement is just as experimental as my own work. I think that men like Rauschenberg and Lichtenstein and Andy Warhol and people of that sort, there's a possibility they may have contributed something, but also they may be just transitional, moving on to something else. At the moment, we're finding ourselves in a period of painting where the artist takes silver nitrate, coats it on the canvas, takes a photographic color negative, projects it onto this color-sensitized canvas, develops it, and then goes ahead and fortifies it with acrylics. This is painting. This is the new super realistic movement. Now, a lot of people argue, well, they say, well, this is a contribution to art. I would question it, because to me, art has a certain emotional factor that has to go into it. If you sing a song, June, the song becomes a part of your whole being. You sing it with a lot of emotion. If you paint a picture, there's an emotional factor that comes out. When you write a poem, when you write a story, there's a person that comes out. When you project this negative onto a silver nitrate canvas, what have you got? The person's gone. And I have very little consideration for that outside of the mechanical procedures that produce something that's a reproduction of a real scene. I can accept it for that. Lichtenstein and Rauschenberg, to me, are no-nos. When I saw a Rauschenberg with his socks pasted up on the canvas, I said, gosh, my socks smell better than that.
If you were to predict, could you predict what directions you think art will take?
I think it'll move back into the more realistic aspects of the thing. Much of the contemporary movement in painting originated, or I think had an influence from with the interior decorator, you know. A picture had to fit into a specific
environmental scene. And consequently, the artist was motivated to paint certain pictures that would fit the modern architecture, modern furniture, and so forth. And I think a painting is independent of that kind of thing. A painting is a very personal thing. It exists by itself. It doesn't belong in a decorator's room as a part of that whole entity, because it has to exist by itself. And this is the way I feel about painting. I don't paint for paint a painting to fit an interior decorator's situation.
How about future directions of your own work? How do you see that?
Good Lord grant me the energy and the power. I can see a lot of changes that I want to develop. I am particularly concerned now in thinking in terms of this light mixture of color instead of the pigment mixture of color. Now actually, when we conceive of a color mentally, we conceive of it, the brain picks it up in terms of mixtures of light, not in terms of mixtures of paint. And I found out so much about the human eye, how the impulse is transmitted to the brain, and how colors are mixed in nature as a result of that transmission. And I know that I have to reinterpret these things. I have to expand my awareness of what I'm seeing. I don't feel that I've arrived in that area. And I think that you can move in abstract areas in realizing that kind of thing, or in representational forms. It doesn't make any difference. But the important thing is coming to an awareness of this total realization of how the human mind perceives a concept. And I think that then we can go ahead and expand an awareness of our whole world. It's something like Einstein coming up with his relativity theory. This E equals mass over something or other. I mean, he gave the scientific world an awareness of an expanded universe. We, in our awareness of how we perceive things, can expand our own universe and give things a bigger existence. And it's a tough problem. I don't know whether I'm capable of solving. I don't know whether I have the brains left to do it or not. They say as you grow older, your brain cells begin to degenerate, and you're supposed to have, 90 billion brain cells? I hope I can function with 70.
Vision is the gift of the artist. Bringing that vision to others is the gift of the artist and the talent of the teacher. Teacher, student, artist. Joseph M. Plavcan is a gift to all of us, the gift of vision.
I firmly was convinced, and I'm still convinced, that people do not see. We don't see things. We're so concerned with our inward problems that are going on inside of it, that the world passes by us sort of casually, and we don't comprehend them. We can't recall the things that we come in contact with, say, 5-10 seconds ago. They're gone. We look at them and they disappear. And my concern was to teach these people to really evaluate the environment that they came in contact with. And I tried to teach people to see, and to see completely.
For a city of its size, Erie has produced an unusually large number of artists. One of the reasons for this proliferation has been a teacher and an artist who has lived in Erie for quite a long time. His name is Joseph M. Plavcan. We're going to talk with him a bit about his career as an artist, as a teacher, and he says as a student. In fact, he says he's still a student. How much of the evolution of your style has been a result of the change in the way you see things, and how much of it is a result of the way that you express what you see?
June, I think the style evolved on the basis of what I saw, but was absolutely unable at the time, at certain periods of my painting, was unable to project. because of the previous training that I had had. Now, when we learn to work graphically, we go back on that old experience of working with a white piece of chalk on a black board and a black pencil on a white piece of paper. Consequently, all of our concepts are in terms of black and white. And up until you graduate from high school, you're not aware of the fact that the world is a color world. And I've had to fight that early experience, subconscious experience of the black and white conditioning, and gradually eliminate that and come out with this real awareness of what this color world is. I felt at the time, June, that I had to create a new world for myself. I wasn't in New York. I was not following any imitator. I was not imitating any movement. I had to initiate something that was personally my own. And this has been an evolution of over 40 years. I am particularly concerned now in thinking in terms of this light mixture of color instead of the pigment mixture of color. Now actually, when we conceive of a color mentally, we conceive of it, the brain picks it up in terms of mixtures of light, not in terms of mixtures of paint. And I found out so much about the human eye, how the impulse is transmitted to the brain, and how colors are mixed in nature as a result of that transmission. And I know that I have to reinterpret these things. I have to expand my awareness of what I'm seeing. I don't feel that I've arrived in that area. And I think that you can move in abstract areas in realizing that kind of thing, or in representational forms. It doesn't make any difference. But the important thing is coming to an awareness of this total realization of how the human mind perceives a concept. And I think that then we can go ahead and expand an awareness of our whole world. I use the Ostwald process, the red, the yellow, the green, and the blue as my four primaries. Now, if you mix red and green together in terms of light, you get yellow. And I work on that principle of perception and concept. This is based on that fact. And there are a lot of other things that are, at the moment I couldn't possibly go into in detail, that take place in the canvas that become very subtle parts of the canvas and make the canvas a vivid and lively thing. If you note what the difference between these and the prior canvases, there is a brilliance there that some people are not willing to accept. And yet this is the world that we're constantly seeing. And someday we'll adjust ourselves to it.
I firmly was convinced, and I'm still convinced, that people do not see. We don't see things. We're so concerned with our inward problems that are going on inside of it, that the world passes by us sort of casually, and we don't comprehend them. We can't recall the things that we come in contact with, say, 5-10 seconds ago. They're gone. We look at them and they disappear. And my concern was to teach these people to really evaluate the environment that they came in contact with. And I tried to teach people to see, and to see completely.